Oh, Marvel. What did you do now? So, Marvel Comics, and to be clear, I am talking specifically about the comics, not the MCU in this video, although the MCU is going to factor into this somewhat. We'll get there when we get there. But Marvel Comics has really stepped in it. And I would say they may have stepped in it about as badly as they ever have since, I would say the last time they stepped in it this bad was Hydra Cap and that whole thing. Although, admittedly, part of the reason that was such a mess was because Marvel was super insistent, no, for real, this is what we're actually doing. And instead of just, either saying nothing or owning up to the fact of what everybody already guessed, this is some weird altered history and it's not actually Cap. But we're not going to go off on that whole thing. It was a not great idea, not exceptionally well executed. Some decent moments, but whatever. No, this time they've decided to kill off Kamala Khan. Now, at my time of speaking, we don't have full context for this yet, because the issue in which it happens, which will be Amazing Spider-Man number 26, and side tangent, real quick, Marvel, can you stop restarting the numbering? I've got comic books from the 90s packed away in a long box that includes Spider-Man issue number 300, and now we're on Amazing Spider-Man issue number 26. Stop. Anyways, that issue is not actually out yet. However, the fact that Kamala Khan is going to die has leaked, and Marvel has definitely not denied that happens. In fact, to the degree that they've revealed anything, they've revealed that the fallout is going to be covered in, its own kind of big thing, and they're bringing back G. Willow Wilson, who effectively created the character and wrote her for the majority of her mainline comic series, is going to write that. Now that it's known, they're starting to milk it. But at time of recording, they also haven't really said much about the justifications for why they may or may not think this is a good idea. And people are ticked. People are ticked for a number of reasons. The first is, obviously, Kamala Khan is a very beloved character. Now, is she at the height of her popularity? No, not really. Her solo book got canceled in 2021 after a pretty successful run. But she's definitely one of their most successful characters that they have introduced in the last 10, 15 years. She's done really well. She's popular. People like her. Again, the sales numbers aren't always there, but that does not mean that people dislike her. It can be tough to judge the popularity of a character by sales numbers alone. That just means that their book isn't selling, but that doesn't mean people want them gone. So never assume that because somebody's book was canceled, that makes the character disposable. A lot of these characters have really devoted fan bases, and even the people who maybe never bought her individual books or the graphic novel compilations, of which I own several, even they probably largely have a positive feeling towards her. I mean, there are some people who have never liked her for, let's just say it, really nonsense reasons, but I acknowledge those people exist. I do not address them or their arguments, because it's all nonsense. But anyways, so Kamala Khan dying. There's the act in and of itself. Killing a major and beloved character is always a risky thing for any comic book, Marvel or DC, to even attempt to do, because if you don't do it right, you're going to tick a lot of people off. And even if you do it right, you're still going to tick a chunk of people off. It's just a question of whether you tick off the majority or not. And yeah, people are not happy about this. And not only because of the simple fact that she is dying. I mentioned we don't know full context as to, why it happens, how it happens. Is it a noble sacrifice? Is it, what is it exactly? Won't that make a difference? No, not really, because the main reason people are ticked off is because she's dying as a side character in somebody else's book. You need to understand the importance and the impact of Kamala beyond just the fact that people like her. She is one of only a handful at this point, really notable teenage heroes in Marvel. Marvel characters at this point skew older. I mean, a lot of them are technically in their 20s, but they're written as if they're in their 30s, and they generally kind of read that way. We've got Miles Morales, we had Kamala Khan, and there's like a bunch of side ones, but there aren't that many prominent teenage characters, so that's one thing. Secondly, she's a Muslim character. Now, I see some people misconstrue that she is either the only or was the first Muslim superhero. She's not. There's actually a number of others. There's Josiah X, there's Dust, there's Dr. Fazia Hussein, who is actually pretty dang cool, and she wields frickin' Excalibur. But the thing is, none of those people have had their own mainline book. She has. So she is undeniably the most prominent Muslim character in the Marvel Comics canon. And as I said, the only one who's been a title character for a regular book. So there's that. There's how few Pakistani or Pakistani American characters there are. Not a lot of those either. So they took a beloved character who is non-white, has an immigrant family, has a minority religion, and they kill her off, not even in her own book. And when I say she's been a minor supporting character in Spider-Man lately, I mean that. Yes, she's been popping up, but out of the last 25 issues of The Amazing Spider-Man, she's appeared in 5. She's not in there as an equal partner. She hasn't been like integrated as a major ongoing subplot. She's a thing that's popped up here and there. She's had her own subplot, kind of, but she's not a major focus. You couldn't say she was a major supporting character on the scale of, well, I would say Mary Jane. I don't even know. Are they dating now? No, he's dating Black Cat now. I can't keep track of what they're doing with Peter's love life. It's a mess. Regardless, she doesn't rise to the status of even major supporting character. She is a minor recurring character in this. And I've talked before about how when you place minority characters in minor supporting roles like this, they tend to be treated as more disposable, not necessarily because of their race, religion, or other minority status, but because minor characters, minor side characters are inherently more disposable. So when that's where you put your representative characters for minorities, guess what? A lot of minority characters die. Except that, why was she even relegated to this in the first place? Which, of course, brings us to the question, why would they do this? On its first impression, it makes no sense. Like, Ms. Marvel has premiered on Disney+. She's going to be in a movie soon. Why would they kill her in the comics? What sense does that make? Well, not a lot, unless you know the context of what's been going on in the comics and also some of the things that Marvel has done with the comics in the wake of the MCU. So, the first thing is you need to understand there has been a general trend for the Marvel Comics to crowbar in some reasons to bring the comics version of their characters more in line with the MCU. Because the MCU characters, they get adapted. They get changed for one reason or another. Changes to backstory, changes to power set, changes to the iconography and the outfit or what have you. And it is not uncommon for those changes to be integrated, and in some cases even retconned, into the original comics so that the comic characters seem more like their movie counterparts. Which, I'll just say up front, I think that's a really stupid idea. I do. I just think that's a terrible idea. I'm not going to say it's never a great idea. Like, I'll give you an example where it makes a lot of sense. Negasonic Teenage Warhead from Deadpool. That was a side character who literally meant nothing and was picked at random simply because the name was so cool for the Deadpool movie, and they did completely their own thing, and she was awesome, and that was a meaningless character in the comics. So yeah, sure, make that change. That's fine. But when changes are happening to beloved characters and they're doing well in the movies, and you go, well, let's change the comics to be more like that. Well, I know the theory is people will be more likely to pick up the comics if they're in line with the movies, except that a decade plus of the comic sales failing to get much of a boost off the back of the movies shows that that's not true. That doesn't happen. I would argue it gives you less of a reason to read the comics because it's not like, oh, what's different? What can I find? What's the deeper things? What are the things that they changed? Will I find this more interesting? Oh no, it's just the same thing now. It used to be different, but it's not anymore. Oh, Okay. And then, of course, you tick off the longtime readers who are the reason these characters are popular enough to be put in the movies in the first place. Like, it's a stupid. I understand why they started doing it. It hasn't worked, and I wish they would stop. But that has been going on for a long time. Whether it has been adjusting characters' costumes to be more in line, adjusting their powers. Heck, this even goes back older than the MCU. When Spider-Man 3 came out, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man 3, they contrived a reason to have Peter in a black costume in the comics. So they've been doing this for ages, and it's never really worked. They still keep doing it anyway. It's like they don't know how to stop. So, why did I bring all that up? Am I suggesting that they're going to be killing Kamala Khan in the Marvels and that's why they're going to kill her in the comics? No, that's not what I'm suggesting. But killing her in the comics is heavily speculated to be a mechanism by which to bring her more in line with the MCU version. Because there's a couple of key differences with the MCU version. Well, there's basically two. There's two big ones. One has to do with her power set, and the other has to do with the source of her powers. Now, the power set one I'll set aside. I'll mention it again real quickly towards the back end, but we're going to focus on where her powers come from. Because the MCU, in the, I believe it was the very last episode of the Ms. Marvel TV show, hinted at the idea of mutation.
Kamala, there's something different in your genes, like a mutation.
The idea that she is a mutant, which would be a way to start introducing mutants and then eventually the X-Men. And in and of itself, for the MCU, that's fine. That's fine. Like, the specifics of where her powers came from, I'm not going to say it had no meaning. I'll talk a little bit more about what it was in the comics, and it did tie her to certain characters that made for some interesting things. But by and large, most issues, the exact origin of her powers didn't matter in the comics. She was just going to have her adventures, do her slightly fangirly thing, be awkward and adorable and wonderful. It didn't really matter exactly where her powers came from. So I didn't really have a problem with them changing it to mutation. I did think that the way they introduced it with just this character going, it's like a mutation, and they do a little lick of the 90s X-Men cartoon theme, like
a mutation.
I didn't really love, but that had to do with execution, not concept. In the comics, she's not a mutant, she's an Inhuman. Now, depending on how good your memory is, you may recall that the Inhumans was a very failed attempt at a TV show. And this was like prior to Disney Plus, so they pretend it didn't happen anymore. But this whole thing gets really convoluted really quick. The whole mutants and Inhumans thing is very intermeshed for dumb reasons. So, for a long time, Fox, before Disney bought it, was a separate entity, held the adaptation rights for film and also for TV for X-Men characters and any related mutant characters. Now, there were some characters who kind of ended up in a weird middle ground and they got shared custody over, like Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. But for the most part, Fox had the mutants and the X-Men. Now, Ike Perlmutter, who at the time was heading up Marvel, just as a whole, he really hated the idea that anything that they did in the comics might somehow generate interest in the movies, because he hated that Fox had the rights to these movies. And so the importance of mutants, and actually the sheer population of mutants, was continually being downplayed for a chunk of time. They were being killed off left and right, a bunch of mutants got depowered, and then there was the whole thing they did with the Inhumans. So the Inhumans, super simplified, are a race of beings. They live on the moon. They were tinkered with sort of genetically, and they exist kind of in parallel to humanity. And the way that they manifest powers, and their powers can be just about anything, but the way they manifest powers is it gets unlocked by exposure to a thing called Terrigen Mist. So, what Perlmutter had them do in an effort to minimize anything that he perceived as being some kind of free publicity for X-Men related stuff that Fox was doing, minimized the X-Men and went big on the Inhumans. And that included something called the Terrigen Mist Bomb, which basically sent Terrigen Mist across the entire planet, and normal people, it does not affect them. But anyone with the correct, specific Inhuman gene would suddenly develop powers. And that is where Kamala Khan got her powers. And again, this was an effort to basically just still have a bunch of people with random, weird, wild powers that you don't have to explain the origin for, but have that not be mutants anymore. Because that's what mutants have become. They were a catch-all for, we want somebody with a power and we don't have to come up with an origin. It's a mutant. They have this as a mutation. Cool. They replaced that with Inhumans, basically. And so Kamala Khan, her powers are because she's an Inhuman. She was exposed to Terrigen Mist. She developed her stretchy, embiggening powers. But not only have the Inhumans been sort of dialed back in the comics, their TV show failed, and the MCU is teeing up bringing in mutants. So what the suspicion is that killing Kamala Khan in the comics is going to facilitate their having her essentially be reborn as a mutant. I don't have the full details on exactly how this works, but for some reason right now, and honestly, this may have been done specifically for the purposes of accomplishing what they're doing with Kamala. It wouldn't shock me. At the very least, it's a big bonus for them if it wasn't done for this purpose. But effectively right now, mutants are actually immortal. If they die, they get reborn on this island. I think it's Krakoa. There is an island where mutants, if they die, they get reborn on. So while it is not currently confirmed, the big speculation is that Kamala Khan is going to die and then be reborn, and that will be their way of signaling she's not actually an Inhuman, she's a mutant, which would bring it more in line with what they're going to do with the MCU. So if this is true, and I tend to suspect it is, what's the problem? She's just going to come back anyway. The problem is disrespect. The problem is that you treat a beloved minority character, you treat her life as being less important or worth throwing away, even briefly, simply for the purposes of this convoluted method to alter her origin because of a TV show and a movie. It shows an extreme amount of disrespect for her as a character that they would yank her about in all these directions and do all this convoluted stuff just to be slightly more in line with the MCU. Is that how little you think of her? Of her history? Of all the time that she spent with the Inhumans, of the relationships she's built, of her amazing time with Lockjaw, which is some of the best friggin' stuff that Marvel has done in about a decade? Does that all mean so little that you want to do this convoluted thing that involves killing her just so that you can have her be a mutant instead? It just makes it really feel like the people at Marvel don't understand why people like her. People don't care if she's a mutant. They care if she continues to have the wonderful, amazing personality and terrific supporting cast she's always had. And I said I'd mention her powers real quick, and I am going to mention it in this effect. I think that the full cynicism will be on display if, in addition to doing this and having her be reborn as a mutant, if they also use that as an opportunity to alter her powers so they work more like they do in the MCU too. Because in the MCU, she basically has light construction powers, and she does use them in a create a giant arm and shift this kind of thing. But in the comics, she just has straight up stretching powers. And that was actually kind of key because her powers, when she uses them, it looks weird. It's off-putting. It's gangly. It's awkward. Because she's an awkward, gangly teenager. It's thematic. And now it's just light constructs. And I would not be shocked, but I would be disappointed if they also take this whole thing and bring her back and use it as an opportunity to make her powers look more like they do in the MCU as well. The thing about this kind of move is it always signals that the editors, I'm not going to necessarily say the creators, because oftentimes the writers are working under editorial mandate, and while they're usually very reticent to ever say they were forced to do this stuff, if they want to keep working in the industry, it's in their best interest not to say that if that is the case. So I'm not necessarily going to blame the on-the-ground level writers, but I am going to blame the editors. I'm going to blame the editorial staff who are treating this character as just a pawn to be moved around until she is more in line with the more popular version. It shows such a disregard for the history, for the love, for the fandom, for the fact that there's nothing wrong with her being her own thing in the comics that is not exactly like the movies. It's just a slap in the face, even if the story's good. Even if they come up with a really beautiful death. I know that's an awkward phrase to say, but like narratively, you can do tragedy really well. Even if it's a beautiful death, it still shows a disregard and a disrespect for her that they would do this to her at all, much less when she is a minor supporting player in somebody else's book. I think people are right to be ticked off about this. She's not only a beloved character, she's an important character. She's a unique character. And not just for the diversity quota, but because she brings an energy that a lot of Marvel doesn't have in the MCU or out of it. So yeah, this is nonsense. And I don't like it. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think there's another reason why they're going to kill Kamala Khan? Do you think it might actually be a good idea? I don't on either front, but whatever your thoughts might be, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills, enables me to do this as my living. Even if you can't assist me that way, like, share, subscribe. Those also help me out. Don't worry too much about it, though. Whether you know Kamala, whether you're a fan of hers from the MCU, from the comics, or you've never heard of her before, what I really want you to remember is you are beautiful. You are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. Massive thanks to my Patreon supporters, and in particular, I want to thank Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfullah, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Ruth, Oliver B., Solitary Pictures, Ulrich Bogdan, Melinda Walters, Jen, Leotha Boyd, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Fernabilax the Poodle, Robin Powell, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Caspero, Adam R.D.L. Taylor, David Hall, Shayla Gourlay, and Rosalind Bennett. Thanks for your support. You can get your name in the credits too if you feel like hearing me possibly struggle with it for several times before getting it right.